start like this, and I remove these labels, and I ask, if I pulled anyone off the street, and I didn't tell them what I was doing, and I said, is this correlated with that, or is that correlated with that? There is nobody in the world that would ever say, you know what, this correlates well with that.
Right.
If someone told me that, if someone turned that into me, I would say, F minus, go back and learn your science. And yet that's what we're being told. It doesn't make, here's the correlation between sunspots and temperatures. You're telling me that's not a better fit than that?
It looks on the face of it, but you have to go and look and actually go through the
you run a correlation, and the correlation with temperature and CO2 lags 800 years.
I saw enough of your YouTube thing for you to show a correlation of
that's man. Oh yeah, you like that?
You can't go by just correlation. You have to go look. A correlation tells you something, but you have to go further, right?
You have to have a theory tying the two. The theory with global warming.
Theory that makes predictions, and then you have to be able to test it.
And that's my point. But my point is that the theory is CO2 causes temperature. You have to have data that shows CO2 leading temperature. They don't have it. The theory that combines it is, this is what you call a misspecified model. This is a misspecified and underspecified model. And you know how you keep saying, this is Mars, by the way. This is the Mars polar ice cap. Okay? Aren't you telling me, won't you just sit there and think that probably what's warming the Mars is also warming the Earth?
You're going through the same thing. There is a warming, but it doesn't explain more than a fraction of the warming we're feeling. There's all sorts of other factors. I mean, the scientists have studied all these things.
This is water vapor. This is water vapor. And when you're saying that the scientists have studied this stuff, let me show you the scientist who does study this stuff. I went to see him. And you want to know what he tells you? He tells you that they can't model this stuff because they don't have a good way to model water vapor. He tells you that. And he tells
water vapor is a tough one. That's true.
And the problem is, that's like me telling you that you can explain weight loss without exercise and caloric intake in your model. It doesn't make any sense. Here's Albany, New York, 1822, 49.2. Here's Albany, New York, 2005, 49.2. You download the data, run a regression, it shows temperatures are actually been cooling over that time period.
Locally,
okay? The longest,
certainly local
but that's the longest continual track record of thermometer data. If you look at NASA says over the last 18 plus years, there's been no discernible warming trend in the lower atmosphere. That's NASA. Here's another thing with the science.
Really, I think this is where I think you go to a place where I just don't understand, which is you seem to think that all the scientists that have been studying this and publishing it, they haven't thought of this.
This is what they say. My point is, I'm just addressing it from a scientific approach. If you give me 3 data sets, okay, if I have 3, I'm going to go out there and measure temperature, and I measure it with an electronic thermometer, a alcohol thermometer, and a mercury thermometer, and I bring you back 3 data sets, and the alcohol and the mercury are almost exactly the same, and my electronic one is way off. Which one do you go with? Do you ever go with that electronic one that's the outlier, or do you go with the one method that confirms itself?
Well,
just answer now. Forget this is global warming. I'm saying common sense.
As a scientist, you say, well, something's wrong, right?
Yeah.
But you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You might think it's more likely to be what the mercury and the other one says because you have 2 feet of data versus 1. But you should take a look.
2 different approaches to measuring the same variable.
So you should see, is the alcohol one, is there a problem with that approach? Or maybe that's a more accurate one and there's a problem with it. Science is hard.
You got to give me that if I come back with a confirming methodology, you're far more likely to say, I'm going with the one that's confirmed versus the one that's not confirmed, right? When they have 3 measurements, balloon, ground, and satellite, balloon and satellite confirm each other. The ground measurements don't. The ground measurements are the only one that's showing the temperature increase, so they go with the one that shows the temperature increase over the 2 that don't. That's the problem. They have 2 confirming measurements and they go against it. Here, once again, is the CO2 measurements, how they have these global warming potentials where they show that clearly that there's a factor built in that the residency life means a lot. And they show you that, and the reason they do that is because by doing so, you overweight CO2 in your models. So if you're going to do that, you have to be able to say, okay, I better have a good estimate of the residency life of CO2 in the atmosphere, right? I mean, you'd have to. Okay. Well, right here, sure enough, you have it once again. Lifetime in this IPCC report is 50 to 200 years. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Of CO2. Okay. Now, here's a report that says 100 years plus. So everybody's out there telling you that CO2 stays in the atmosphere for more than 100 years. Okay? Well, look here. This is the IPC, the most recent IPC report that I could find. Here it says atmospheric lifetime is 50 to 200 years. That is junk science, no matter how you put it. If you're going to sit there and rest this model on a global warming potential, and you come up and tell me that the residency life is critical, and then you tell me I don't know what my residency life is, you can make this model sing and dance any way you want it if you have that kind of an error. More importantly, is there's a way to test what the residency life is, right? If I have the atmospheric CO2 that comes from good old Keeler from Mauna Loa, he makes the mistake of actually giving you the data. And as you can see, this data swings by about 5% a year. Okay, so you have a 5% variation per year. Now, given the fact that this is a continual turnover, not just a one-time turnover, you can just from that measurement alone say with certainty that at the maximum residency life is 5 into 100 is 20 years. Okay, so you have an upper limit by their own annual variations, and that ignores the fact that you're continually recycling, and so it's got to be much lower than 5%, according to their own data. There's another way to check it also. Back in
the problem with this is, as you know, it's easy to find data that will prove anything, right?
But remember, I'm using their data. This is their data. None of this is my data.
Yeah, I know.
I'm taking their data.
I, as a scientist, know I could find some data, because there are some cases in science where something's proven 100%, where everyone's like, whoa, and climate is just too complicated. It's never like that. There's always contradictory stuff, and you always have to look at the overall.
Well, we run into that with economics all the time.
Right. Economics is even harder because often,
sure.
You know.
It's how you model the S&P 500.
Yes.
It's like modeling weather.
But that's why that's why there's this scientific method where people have to go through peer review and they have to slowly prove their thing, and that's why I have some faith in the fact that there is a scientific consensus that I don't understand why you don't.
Once again, I have a huge amount. If you haven't noticed, that's what my real problem is. They're not following the scientific method. Now here, and you're getting, because you're always going to go back to this peer review stuff, and I am honestly interested in your opinion, so I'm not challenging you. What I mean, because I want someone to shoot.
That I'm mostly saying I want
people to shoot holes in this because I get in front of people to tell this, and I don't want to mislead anybody.
Yeah.
But
so
you're getting back to you're getting back to shoot, where were we going? Oh, this is the peer review. Okay, I just showed you how we went from one chart to another chart as far as temperature goes in the IPCC, right? If you follow this at all, you understand that people were just hysterical when they saw this hockey stick data. Okay, there's a huge debate on the hockey stick chart. Okay? Now, they've removed it from the IPCC report. Now, wouldn't it just be logical to think that if they make such a major change, that somebody, a critic out there, must have some valid points? Or do they just sit there and say, well, let's just remove the hockey stick chart for no reason? Okay, there's got to be peer-reviewed stuff out there that's valid. They ignore it.
Things are criticized. You said they took it out, so obviously you're saying there was
show me the peer-reviewed data supporting it. Al Gore tells me that there's no peer-reviewed data out there, and yet they're making such major changes with no one because there's no one with a valid criticism. It doesn't make any sense.
No, it's not saying that no one criticizes any of the details, right? But it's saying that there's a
then
consensus about the
there must have been
overall data.
there must have been a problem with the hockey stick, right? To remove it.
I don't know. I don't know anything about that. So
well, I would want to see the reason why they removed it, because there's got to be some peer review data out there, and if it's the peer review data that the criticisms that I've seen, it's going to blow this out of the water, because the attacks were so just accurate and vicious. It's unbelievable. But here's another way to take a look at the residency life. This is when we were doing nuclear testing inside our atmosphere. We jacked up C14 all the way up to 200. This is the normal level. Okay? Just after 30 years, you're almost back down to the normal level again. So at the most, and remember you're producing C14 on a continual basis, at the most, you're up once again a maximum of 30 years, according to almost every method you can find that's logical to test that theory. So you've got a maximum of 20 and 30, and there's all situations where it's assuming a one-time deal. This is where you're continually producing and pulling out, so it's a net basis. So at most, even under that situation, you're dealing with 30 years.
Have you talked to a climatologist or you asked them to?
Oh, I go down and harass Lonnie Thompson all the time. I've got Lonnie Thompson's data right here that I hope we can review.
And what does Lonnie Thompson say?
He totally disagrees with me. Oh, I got the best one for
Has he
you.
explained this? What's wrong with this? This is what's wrong with that?
I've got his presentation right here. We're going to review it. And then you get to support it. You get to support the greatest global warming scientist out there. And we're just simply review. This is Dr. Thompson. This is what he does. These are his claims.
Look, I'm just saying that obviously I'm not in a position to respond to all these details because that's not my my expertise. But if that's what you're looking for, then you should go to one of those people.
Well, they show up my event to ask pointed questions. This is one that I think you'll have to agree with me on. Okay. They make a claim that the stratosphere is cooling.
Thanks again.
Hey, it's been a real pleasure.
Same here.
All right?
Really.
Maybe we'll do it again.
Yeah.
If I'm in town.
Good journeys to your back home, and good luck with everything. And thank you so much.
Sure.
We'll be in touch.
Yes, thanks for having this
Oh,
happen.
good. And she'll let us know when it's on, and I guess maybe we'll make a tape and get it on YouTube and get it
Should
put
I
out.
leave? I mean, I don't.
No, we need you. If you could stay. Can you stay?
Sure, for what?
Joe will team up with you. He's been beating me up all weekend. You and Joe team up and just shoot holes in my theory.
Okay, yeah.
But this is one that will really open your eyes. This is the altitude. And I'm just saying, once again, just forget what you've been told.
See, the problem with trying to open my eyes is that I know that people who know more about this than I do have concluded otherwise.
This one's a real
I
eye.
trust them.
This one's a real eye. You're not going to be able to deny this one. Okay?
I'm sure that's not true.
Just watch.
I'll be able to deny anything.
Believe, yeah, well, just watch. Okay? This is altitude. And I've seen this done. This is altitude. Okay? Partial pressures. Okay? This is the troposphere and the stratosphere. This is the stratosphere cooling. Matter of fact, this part describes it. It tells you stratosphere cooling rates, color blue through red, yellow to blue, and it explains this is the cooling area of the stratosphere. It tells you that. It says for CO2 it is obvious that there is no cooling in the troposphere, but a warm cooling effect in the stratosphere. Am I misreading that? And is that not labeled CO2, and is that not showing a cooling area in the stratosphere?
She says, okay, thank you for your testimony, Mr. Leslie George. Okay.
Are you saying they miswrote it?
I get it.
I'm just saying that this is what the theory is. The way because the whole theory is that we're trapping heat in the troposphere, right? By trapping the heat, we're preventing the heat from getting in the stratosphere. That's why you get cooling in the stratosphere, warming in the troposphere. That's the whole theory, right?
And he told me. He stands next to me.
Because he knows your name?
No. Because he's sort of daily news for
Red,
following.
yellow, green, showing,
Got
green,
him
blue,
photo.
orange,
I
showing,
can't get
orange.
myself in the daily news, but I was sure
Color is shown, dotted line.
stand next to him. So he asked me a bland question that means nothing. Because he didn't know
So
what
too, it's
it
obvious that there is no cooling in the troposphere,
Sure enough, it's in the daily news 1 hour later.
but a strong cooling effect in the stratosphere.
But what's the richest newspaper?
Am I misreading that in any way whatsoever?
On the other hand, cools the upper stratosphere, warms the.
You know?
Okay, so what are you saying about this?
I'm just saying, am I reading that inaccurately? Am I not reading this that CO2 traps heat in the lower atmosphere, the global warming effect? By trapping the heat, you're preventing it from getting up to the stratosphere. That's why you warm the troposphere and you cool the stratosphere, as demonstrated by CO2 labeled cooling area of the stratosphere. Because the heat's not getting here, it's being trapped down here. That's the whole global warming theory, right? That is the cornerstone of global warming theory. And they're stating it right here. This is environmental science published for everybody around the world.
Okay.
Am I misleading? Am I misreading this in any way whatsoever?
On my blog, because there are going to be so many people looking at it. And then, guess who asks for her link?
Okay.
Her blog.
I mean, that's the thing. Matter of fact, this is what Lonnie Thompson says. This is what Lonnie Thompson says. This is his presentation. Stratosphere cools as the surface warms. Variations in the sun's output would instead cause similar trends in the atmosphere layers instead of opposite ones. Okay? And he says that's what's going on. He shows you this chart. Changes in stratospheric temperature, cooling. Okay? He shows you this. Okay? This he doesn't show. I got this from, because when I dug into it, I wanted to see what they're talking about. Okay? Read those charts and tell me where the error is.
The National Security Advisor said that. Walter Cronkite said this. Dan Rather said that.
You guys want to do another show?
Yeah, we got a great one.
You want to do it? You can do it?
What do you mean?
I turn on the lights and we roll.
I think we got a good one if you stick around. You'll like it.
Are you
I
okay?
guess they don't
Get
know how
Joe
it
over.
works.
Joe will
You
team
want
up
some
with you.
vegetarian food to eat?
I'm not hungry.
I mostly
I
eat
know, I'm not
vegetarian. I
hungry,
just
maybe.
like to always stand up for my food.
Okay, well, what's going on here is they make the mistake of giving you wavelength and altitude. They tell you this is cooling. They label it CO2 and ozone. Okay, they're saying that this blue-gray area is the trapped heat. This area is the cool heat. Makes a great case. You trap the heat here, it cools up here. Makes sense. The heat's not rising to cool that out,
Can you
right?
pick up the mic?
And this is how they demonstrate. The problem is they forgot that they put a wavelength down here. If you drop the perpendicular, you come down here and you find out that this is 6.5 microns. 6.5 microns is peak absorption for water vapor. It's nowhere near the 2.7 or 4.3. So they mislabeled it instead of water vapor. This is the whole cornerstone of global warming theory.
Did you ask about that?
I don't know. I mean, I can read the chart.
Well, you know,
And more importantly,
it's one thing if I read the whole paper and see everything in
See?
detail, but otherwise I'll just say that
okay, this is
it's-
ozone. Okay, would you agree that it labels CO2 and ozone?
yes.
Would you agree that that lines up with 10 microns?
Yep.
Okay. Would you agree that when you come down, oh shoot, we got to go back. Bottom line is, if you go back and you look at the thing for ozone, ozone absorbs exactly at 10 microns. So they accurately labeled this one, and they inaccurately labeled that one to make their point. How could you
This
do
is
that?
wave number.
That's wavelength. Well, it's centimeters. That's a mic.
Centimeters to the minus
Yeah,
one.
centimeters, yeah. Yeah. So these are
Is that
microns.
centimeters or centimeters to minus one? Because microns would make sense, right? Micron's
Well,
smaller than a centimeter.
Either way, this is ozone.
You can't zoom
1,000
that chart,
is
can you?
it would be make it 10 microns. If that is accurate at microns, that's 10 microns.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Okay, that's 10 microns. That's the
No,
point.
thanks.
Can I grab one? Thank you, Paul.
Have more.
Okay, but the key is, according to this chart, they've mislabeled this as water vapor. It's the peak absorption for water vapor. But this is what I have here is this is Lonnie Thompson's claims, and then what would be an interesting show, I think, if we just simply go through this. I mean, I saw him at the Mechanical Engineers give this conference, and he makes his claims, and nobody challenges him. And these are mechanical engineers. These aren't dumb people. These are what I would consider the top students. And he makes these claims that just made my jaw drop when I heard him make it. And I would love, now that you can take the time to actually look at the data and give an explanation, I would love someone to shoot holes in this theory.
Like I said, you should find someone who
I haven't been able to find
knows more
anybody.
about
That's the
details
problem.
than I do.
I've had Polar Research Center show up. They ask a couple questions and run away. I show this to people, and they don't even want to try to defend it. And that's my problem with it. I mean, this science is such a junk science. It's amazing. He makes this claim. Look at this one. He makes this claim: temperatures have risen more in the winter than in the summer, opposite what would be expected if the sun were driving the temperature increase. See a problem with that?
See, now I know that's not true. I know that they predict that temperatures will increase more in the winter than in the summer.
What right now?
I
what
don't
is
know
going?
what the.
This is once again. This isn't my claim. This is Lonnie Thompson got in front of the mechanical engineers at Ohio State and told them this. Temperatures have risen, and I think he has a chart. No, he doesn't.
He said it was opposite.
Yeah, this is word for word a quote from his own presentation. Okay, I literally got a hold of his actual presentation. Temperatures have risen more in winter than in summer, opposite that would be expected if the sun were driving the temperature increase. This is the world's This is the
In
guy
the northern hemisphere, or
This, yeah,
both
northern
hemispheres.
hemisphere. That's where the warming trend is in the northern hemisphere. Okay, but once again, when he gives this, okay, he says it's the mechanical engineers. Okay, the warming trend, he says that it's warming more in winter than in summer. Okay, you see any problem with that at all? And he rules out the sun. We're the closest to the sun in the wintertime. That's consistent with a warming sun. Explain that
see,
one.
you have to ask him what he means, because that seems like a naive answer, and I don't know if it is or not. That's how it looks. It looks like he's talking about something complicated, and you're pulling out something simple.
Well, that's
you should
my
ask
whole
before
point.
you make statements.
That's
all I'm saying.
that's my whole point. Every time I get to this, they say, "Well, the models have got to." I asked this guy. Who I wish if I can get to his name. This is the real reason of global warming, by the way. And this is once again Lonnie Thompson's chart. and he's telling you that CO2 caused it, and yet he shows you precipitation changes. Okay? He shows you two charts that show dryness, coolness, increased water, increased temperature, and then he tells you CO2 changes it. Doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, because increase in CO2 would have an effect on precipitation,
No, increase in the oceans through the sun increases precipitation.
which is an effect of global warming. But I'm just saying that
Oh,
these are, because I haven't been responding specifically to anything you've said, right? That's been my consistent thing. So
Yeah.
you keep pointing out things, but it's I'm always giving the same answer.
this is your
I don't know if this is good to film because I'm not.
No, it's okay.
this is the guy that you're referring to. Climate change now for the hard part, which is doing exactly what you're doing. What are we going to do? Okay, this is Dr. Gerald Stokes, Vice President of International Partnership in the Laboratory Management Division of Battelle Memorial Institute, Physics Research Department. This is the guy you're referring to when you say builds the models. Okay, he spent 250
Well, just one
million.
person. Other people have models too.
Well, Battelle Memorial. Well, let me put it this way. This guy is enough. This guy is big enough that they gave him $250 million. He used it. Came back and said these models don't work, so they gave him another $500 million to go prove global warming is caused by CO2. Now, what kind of
come up with better models.
better model? But it's based on CO2. Okay, so but my point is, if I go out there and I spend $250 million and I'm not getting the results I want, is the normal scientist going to say maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree, or is the normal scientist going to say let's pour more money on it? I guarantee I can find CO2 as the cause.
No, he's saying that the models aren't accurate, not that they're
But you want to know
not
why?
showing like he
You want
wants
to know
them to
why
show.
he said the models aren't accurate? He said because we can't model water vapor.
Right, it's a problem. That's why he wanted more money to get more accurate results so that we can determine.
But we're going to go do all this kind of extreme stuff when it's more likely due to water vapor, which is not caused by global warming.
The thing is, you say it's more likely caused by water vapor, and that's you make a case for that, basically that there's a lot of it, but
Well, let me put
but there's
it
a
this-
lot of people have looked into and tried to make estimates, and they come to an opposite conclusion.
Okay, let me just put it this way. This is
Because
okay,
water vapor can cause cooling or warming.
if it's a cloud, yes.
Right.
Okay, but the vast majority of it is due to the greenhouse gas effect. I mean, the greenhouse trapping is 100% water vapor, or whatever gets reflected from underneath the sun, underneath the clouds, which probably isn't very much. My point is though, if you give me that it's water vapor, which I think every bit of their data, even out, I mean, the best data they shows water vapor. If it comes down to water vapor being the problem, what do you have to do? And why are you never going to hear anyone say it? But actually, the National Academy of Science just did say it. What's the solution? And also, it's the same reason why you have relative cooling in the southern hemisphere versus warming in the northern hemisphere. You got to cut down trees. Trees are creating all the rain. We're basically turning the northern hemisphere into a rainforest. You got to get rid of the water vapor. How do you get rid of the water vapor? You cut down the trees. That's the solution. They're not going to want
the
to
tree
tell you.
effect is dependent upon latitude.
Well, here's another example. You know how I use that bizarre correlation between obesity and exercise, and I show obesity's gone up, Nike shoes sales have gone up. I can show that exercise causes obesity. Okay, it's called a misspecified model. Okay, well, you're pointing out that CO2 is increased with the industrial age. But you know what? Tree density is also increased with the industrial age. More
So it's
importantly,
not enough to have correlation. You have to show
well, there's
linkage.
well, that's my point. You've got your correlation of industrial age and CO2. I've got my correlation of fire prevention and tree stock. Okay, you've got a correlation between a very weak greenhouse gas and a very minor change. I've got the most major greenhouse gas and a major change. I've got a big change in the 95 percentile, most significant variable. You've got a minor swing and a minor significant. Whose model wins in any normal science? My model, not the trace gas.
What you should do is write this up, submit it for peer review, and that way you can find out if it's right or wrong. Because
Well,
the thing
do you
is,
think anyone would agree?
that's my underlying point, that a lot of people look at a lot of data, and you can see different things that you want to see, especially in such a politicized issue like this. People will see whatever they want in the data, but only by doing a rigorous peer review process in which lots of scientists are working on this and criticizing each other and coming to some kind of consensus. That's the only way you can find
No, according to Al Gore,
truth from false.
according to Al Gore, no peer-reviewed skeptical scientists get published. He says that in his own movie. And yet, on that same page, he shows you the number of press releases that are critical of global warming. You've got a 50-50 split of critics and supporters, and yet there are no peer-reviewed journals saying anything negative about global warming. How can the press find these skeptics, but the peer-reviewed journals can't?
That's how the press works. See, I know about stuff like this. The
And
press,
I know
they
the
want
skeptics.
both sides of a story. So
I know
even if
Dr.
one side
Singer,
is
I know Dr. Lindsay, I know these people, and they get Dr. Essenheim. I mean, these people produce good science, and they can't get peer reviewed. They can get interviewed for the Great Global Warming swindle, but they can't be peer reviewed. They have, I mean, nobody out there can sit there and look at the sun stuff and get that stuff published and say, we've got a problem here. Lonnie Thompson
There
gets
are
this.
studies
Lonnie
on the
Thompson.
sun I've seen.
Lonnie Thompson will get this published though.
Show them the chart on the sun.
Oh, okay. I'll get back to him in a second. Let me just finish this. Lonnie Thompson is telling you that the glaciers are melting due to global warming, right? We all know that. He shows pictures of it, right? Take a look at those pictures and tell me what do you see. It's kind of odd.
He's saying that temperature has an effect upon glaciers, and the glaciers disappearing is consistent with the temperature increases that we're seeing.
Temperature
and
increases,
that were
right?
predicted from
Implies that it's
increasing
melting.
greenhouse gases.
Implies that glaciers are melting. Al Gore shows you that show with all that water running down the glaciers, right? He implies that the glaciers, especially Kilimanjaro, his favorite one, is melting, disappearing to global warming, correct? Take a look at that. Tell me what's wrong with that picture. He's standing in dust. That glacier isn't melting. It's evaporating or sublimation. In fact, if you look at Kilimanjaro, it's actually cooling. You got glaciers disappearing in an area that's cooling. Help me explain this one. This is the data. And why is Lonnie Thompson going around telling me that the glaciers are disappearing?
Why don't you ask him?
Global warming. I do. He doesn't. He was not going to answer. You know what he told me? He told me to join the Flat Earth Society. I can show you an email from Lonnie Thompson telling me to join the Flat Earth Society because I ask valid questions. That's your scientist that you're putting a lot of faith in.
No, well,
Paula, have I shown you that email?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're dealing with. These people are. There's
you
no
must
way.
understand that feeling. If someone from the Flat Earth Society came up to you and tried to argue that the Earth was flat and show all sorts of data, you'd probably feel the same way.
Yeah, but I don't think
I'd
this
say
this isn't like the Flat Earth Society stuff. I mean, these are legitimate questions. How, if all the records show that there's no warming in Kilimanjaro, if I can go get it out of National Geographic, how can he be going around telling people that it's due to warming? That's just a credibility issue. I mean, and more importantly, have you been to any of these events? Have you been to a global warming event and when they start talking about their solutions? Okay. That's what really opened my eyes and said, I really want to do something about this. And it happened watch the video that we filmed the other day. Inevitably, when you go to these events, and they're happening at Ohio State all the time, not even the last thing, it came up early, didn't it, Paula? The environmentalists will always bring up population control. And there is no way I'm going to sit back and watch these people start talking about population control and some of these horrific things.
I've never seen any environmental.
I'm glad you said that because we
major
filmed
environmental
it.
group talk about population control in their materials. I mean,
Oh,
I used to.
Paul Ehrlich?
Really?
Population bomb?
That was a long time ago. Do you
Well, he
go to
just-
a lot
he just
of global
republished it.
warming materials on the Sierra Club, Leading and Concerned Scientists, or any of these Greenpeace? They're not going to talk about population control. I mean, one person can have their own personal opinion.
Stop right there. This is the IPCC. This is the IPCC spokesperson. Humans blamed for climate change. If you think you can get an organization like this, a governmental organization, come out there and start pointing the finger at man, and you don't think a totalitarian dictatorship can use this for some pretty bad things. Children, bad for planet. When you start seeing this stuff like this, eco-extremists wants world population at 1 billion.
But humans are blamed for crime
China,
too, but no one's saying we should reduce crime by population control.
Well, these are actual headlines. These are real world. China's one child policy is blamed to helping global warming. China is
That's not the motivation behind the one child policy.
That's not my
point. Of course,
point,
they're going
though.
to say that's an added benefit.
But
like anything.
That's my point, though. When you get totalitarian states starting to say that you can justify infanticide on global warming and people accept it, you got to watch out where that can lead.
No, they're just mentioning that as another.
Greens
argument.
want 20 miles per hour speed limit. You want to stamp out people eating beef, You know, they want to start taxing cow farts. You know, you start censoring these scientists. This is bad news stuff. Weatherman can't even say that he's a Delaware. The witch hunts back in the Little Ice Age, the witch hunts were due to what? Weather cooking. They burned people because they blamed them for the weather back then.
Because they didn't have scientists.
Well, the scientists today are doing the same thing. They're censoring a lot of people.
Yeah, you said they burned the scientists.
Yeah, they burned the scientists back in the thing. They demonize them today.
We have a way of telling truth from falsehood, which is false science.
You've got your great Union of Concerned Scientists. They have a blacklist of all the skeptics.
Not a blacklist. It's a list of skeptics because they can do that because there's only like a dozen.
You don't have a problem with that?
Thousands of people that support it.
You don't have them saying, "Look, these are the people that are, you know." And it's not a friendly.
Because they want to show you, look, these are people who are funded by the oil and oil industry.
Which they are.
Again and again, they just cut out the same few fringe figures, even though the amount of people that support.
I know these people. They're not fringe. These people are not fringe. I mean, you're talking about the guy, Lindsay.
In the scientific community.
But that doesn't say that their science isn't good. I'm showing you some serious problems with this. CO2 is a trace gas with very little absorption in the IR. To sit there and say that other people can't come up with a better model is ridiculous. I mean, when you work in the sun...
People work on this a long time, and they found the best models support people.
No, they don't. I've heard the guy that the models are garbage. Okay?
Well, most scientists seem to disagree with you, and that's their field. That's what they work on every day.
Well, here's what they would have done. Well, I disagree with that. I mean, have you ever talked to anyone in the climate science or the... you know, like have you ever talked to people in that field? I mean, these peer-reviewed scientists, when you talk with them, they aren't exactly the type of people that are pro-corporations and pro-oil. I mean, if you go, the best analogy I give is if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, no matter what problem it is, and you talk to Lonnie Thompson, he's going to say, man, causing it through global warming. Everything. They are just simply trained to say, man is bad, man's causing this problem, we've got to stop.
No, that's part of the magic of the way science works. There are all sorts of individual scientists with their own biases and their own things and their own, they only see what they want to see. But overall, the body of scientists together, they have to constantly challenge each other and criticize each other and go through this process so that, you know, just one person's weirdness doesn't infect the entire way we look at science. That's the magic of the process, and the fact that we come to a point where there's a consensus among scientists, where that debate is essentially over.
Who pays for the majority of these scientists' funding? I mean, if I go talk to Lonnie Thompson, these scientists that are all in agreement, that are producing an IPCC report, okay, and I want to stress the I part, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, and they have as the Great Global Warming Swindle pointed out, they had a directive back in the early 1980s to make sure that CO2 was demonized so that they could justify nuclear power. Margaret Thatcher comes out and says, go find me science to make sure that CO2 is the culprit so we can start justifying nuclear power. So you have the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. The government's controlling these people's revenues. And if you're a scientist, what are you going to sit there and say, I think you're nuts, the sun's doing it? Or are you going to say, give me that money, I'll go prove CO2's doing it?
Scientists do whatever the science tells them. They do research, which is
what happens if I'm a good scientist?
You know, you pointed to a government that said, I want to find data this way, but there's plenty of governments, including our current administration, who goes to scientists and say, I want to find science the other way. And the point is, individual scientists might come up with this or that, but overall, the field is self-correcting one.
Well, for one, you're treating this climate science like it's a hard science. This is probably the softest science I've ever seen. They can't even predict the weather 2 weeks from now. This is more like predicting a stock market.
Weather and climate are very different.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. But my point is, you can't predict the weather in a week. You can't predict the S&P 500 in a week, and yet you're telling me you can predict climate 1,000, 100, 20, 40 years out. Anyone who's ever done a forecast model knows that's ridiculous. Two, you're not going to have, for one, you have so many errors in this model to begin with. If you're going to sit there and make a projection even out further in the time period, because as you go out in time, as you know, the error grows, but you've got an error in just CO2 alone where you don't even know the residency life and you don't even know the global warming potential of the most significant variable of your model. You talk to any statistician, they're going to say, A, you have a misspecified model, okay, meaning that you've reversed your independent and dependent variable because you're...
There are lots of statisticians that work in this field, and they do statistical models, and so you're wrong. Statisticians look at this work, and they say it's good work. There are lots of error bars, that's true, and we don't know 100%. We come to the point where there's this overwhelming feeling that, boy, the evidence is really there. We're pretty certain. It's time to do something about it.
Okay, we're going to do something about, we're going to, help me understand, what do you want to do? You want to, what is the, okay, not what you want to do, but what do you think the consequences of allowing them to demonize CO2, which is airborne fertilizer, it is the fundamental chemical of life. Carbon is the fundamental is organic chemistry, study of carbon. Watch Star Trek. We are a carbon-based life form. We're going to sit there and say the element of life is a pollution now. What's going to happen? What are the governments going to do? And how are we going to benefit, especially on a net basis? Not what you want to do with the vegetarianism, but what's the government going to do with that kind of power?
What the government is going to do is they will look at the things that cause global warming and they will take efforts to reduce them. Ideally, they would use some kind of a market mechanism, in my opinion, like a cap and trade kind of thing, that should cover all the global warming gases, not just carbon dioxide, and allow the market to most efficiently reduce our emissions. And there's lots of ways to do it, which are not just efficient, but will save people money, right? Put the famous example of putting in the low energy light bulbs, people save money in the long run and reduce global warming emissions. So there's lots of things to do that are very cheap. There are some things which are more expensive because in the short run we're very reliant upon oil and coal. But hopefully this would create incentives to find alternative fuels. So in the long run we'll be completely free of these polluting sources.
Okay, those are what the individual can do, and I would have absolutely no problem with that. If you want to go change your light bulbs, nobody would ever sit there and say, let's go waste energy. That's nobody's argument. My point is...
But how about increased fuel economy standards? That's
I wouldn't be for that. I think I'm much sure let the consumer decide if he wants to buy a gas guzzler versus not. That to me is a freedom issue. It should be up to the individual, not the government.
Well,
but
when you start polluting and causing harm to others, that's a place where the government...
CO2 is not a pollution, though. Okay, CO2, you cut out the pollution, or you cut out this pollution, all your trees die. I'm polluting right now when I talk. You probably think I am, okay, but every time I exhale, I produce CO2. When I die,
what you want. Our emissions of CO2 are causing harm to the environment. We don't want no CO2 in the atmosphere, right?
What you're saying, you're saying that we're causing harm to the environment by feeding our trees. Have you looked at if you go in a greenhouse, they increase the CO2 concentration to make sure the plants grow. Plants grow faster and better and increase CO2. Matter of fact, we feed a huge,
from the atmosphere.
If you want to talk about a net benefit of this, because we've been able to increase the yield of our crops, because of this increased atmospheric CO2, we've been able to support more people in this world. This has been a boon for agriculture because higher CO2 leads to higher yields, leads to higher standard of living, leads to more people being fed in this world.
It's a boon in some places, but in other places it's caused desertification and
it's caused what?
Desertification and water shortages and so on. It's a
what's
localized
caused that
thing.
Not CO2 in the atmosphere, certainly not.
Global warming has.
Okay, but global warming, once again, that's if you're saying blaming it on CO2. If let's just assume it's a natural phenomenon like what occurred back in the medieval warming period. Okay, let's just say because we know that the sun is reaching the highest it's been in the last 11,400 years, and yet we aren't even at record high temperatures in the last 2,000 years, unless you rule out the fact that we rewrite history and say medieval warming period never occurred. Okay?
No, but we do find that the increase in the sun's output does not explain most of the warming that we've been seeing.
That combined with the increase... Okay.
I'm just saying, they've combined all these, and that's what all these models are about, but calculating the things that you're suggesting.
But my point is, if you take... My point is that they do not model water vapor very well. My point is that water vapor is the most significant, and it's increased. You do know that the solar output has increased. You cannot tell me that you've got a model worth anything if you don't have those two factors worked in, and you know that they don't. I've been told to my face they don't model water vapor. So once again, I'll go back. This is like telling me you've got a study on weight loss, and yet you forgot to study caloric intake and exercise.
It's not that I forgot. Those are hard to model. But all the evidence we have points with more and more confidence towards the fact that global warming is not only real but caused.
Like I said, I can go do a study and show you that wearing tennis shoes causes weight loss.
You can find a correlation, but you can't. That's not enough. They have lots of positive evidence.
This is the whole key. What you've got is you've got what's called multicollinearity. What they've done is water vapor is increased also, CO2 is increased because temperature is increased. They've simply pulled out water vapor and left CO2 because they both move along together. It's called multicollinearity. They've just simply misspecified their model. They say this is the cause when it's really not. It's a result of something else increase. It's all natural. Once again, I could create this model and make it sing and dance and give you any answer you want, and I could use CO2 to prove that, because you know for a fact that if in fact CO2 does increase, if temperature does increase CO2, you know for a fact you've got a correlation there. It's very easy to get a model to do that. You convince people that the theory is there, it works. The point is, if you really look at what's increased, it's not CO2, it's water vapor. Because CO2 is increased universally, temperatures are not increased universally. The only thing different between the northern and southern hemisphere is the amount of precipitation. The amount of precipitation is what's leading to the temperature increase, and that is almost 100% due to the sun and Mother Nature. And the solution would be, ironically, not planting trees like Al Gore says, but to cut them down, thin out our forests to get them back to natural, healthy forests, versus these tinderboxes that we've created over the last 100 or so years with our fire prevention program. That's why we have catastrophic forest fire. But you think some scientist is going to come out there and say, oh, by the way, trees are causing global warming? It sounds ridiculous, right? Unfortunately, that's just what the National Academy of Science just did.
I just read about it, I think, last month in The Economist magazine.
Sure.
It's not...
Forests are causing the global warming. How many people are going to buy into that and say, this is a great idea, let's go cut down on forests?
No, but that's not what they say. They don't say you should go cut down the forest. They say that when you figure out your forest policy, you should depend upon latitude, because it's a latitude-dependent effect. They're not saying you should cut down the forest. There's all sorts of other effects.
But my point is, if you really want, the bottom line is, if you really want to solve global warming, you cut down our forests. You get the water vapor out of the atmosphere, and you're fine and dandy. I don't think anyone would argue for that. You can pull as much CO2.
Because there's all sorts of other harms involved in doing that. Plus, those trees are absorbing CO2, which is a warming gas.
Would you give me that water vapor absorbs more than CO2?
Mm-hmm.
A lot more, right? So, does the tree not produce a heck of a lot of water vapor every single day?
It does produce water vapor.
It produces
it also
a lot.
absorbs CO2.
But my point is, you've got, let's just say water vapor absorbs 100% of the spectrum and CO2 absorbs 5%. What you're doing is, let me finish though, you're going to pull in a weak one and you're going to release a strong one.
Sorry.
It makes no sense to sit there and say, it's like robbing Peter to pay Paul in a very bizarre way.
Because they did the calculation, and in some places in the world, it's the trees do more cooling than warming, while in other places in the world they do more warming than cooling. So it's a complicated effect. There's all sorts of, like the fact that the tree's albedo and so on. All these things are part of it. It's complicated, is what I'm saying. And I don't think we can rule out cutting down trees if that's going to help global warming, but we need to take into account all the other side effects that will cause. But I guess my overall point is, you look at the data and you have your own opinion, but all these other people have looked at the data who are experts and they came to another opinion.
Sure,
and I think you need to give them some weight. I think you need to say, maybe I'm wrong when so many people, it's at least a serious threat.
A serious threat to me is an ice age. Societies collapse and crumble in an ice age. A serious threat to me is what the government can do when you get everybody to buy into this fact that man's evil, man's causing this problem. How are we going to implement population control? I can look back within the last 100 or so years.
Any government that has talked about implementing population control as a response to...
When they started back in the 1920s, do you think anyone back then was talking about population control? It's not what these benevolent people think of at the time. It's who follows. Lenin had some great ideas. What did Stalin do with them? What did Mao do with them?
I think that's far-fetched. You could argue for population control as a response to almost any problem we have. Any problem, right? But no one does that. That's not a thing.
They are, though. We've got it on tape. Trust me.
No one does that. But
you go to any of these events on the university campuses. It always. I told Paul that was. I made a prediction before we did the spin. I said, "This is what's going to happen. You're going to see these environmentalists bring up population control." And lo and behold, that's what they did. It's just like clockwork. If you go to OSU, you see these things. The environmentalists, they'll bring up Paul Ehrlich. He republished his book under a new title now, justifying what he said was right. But they always bring up population control. It's this Malthusian type of an approach. They view man as bad, and they've got to do something. I've got the one clip right there where the one environmentalist wants the population of the humans being down to 1 billion. Okay?
Well, I mean, that's a
That
separate
doesn't
issue.
scare you when people, and especially when you're dealing with, we're no longer
It's
dealing
not
with an
scary if it's
individual government.
voluntary, right?
We're no longer.
People have the freedom. If you
That's
convince people to have less children, do you have a problem with that?
You have convince people to have less children.
Yeah.
Why would you want to convince people to have less children?
I mean, whatever. Like they have their arguments. If you're one of the people who believe in population control, that's a beneficial thing, and you convince people voluntarily
But
to
that's
have
not
less children,
that's not the way
why is that
history
scary?
works.
With false
when you
science, you convince them to do something natural. When even the Bible says go out and reproduce. For those who are.
Well, I'm just saying there's different point of views. They're
My-
legitimate. A lot of, as you know, Western nations, richer nations, have less kids
yeah, well,
voluntarily. Do you have a problem with that?
that's my argument. If that's your concern, you sit there and you say make everybody rich because richer nations have a much lower birth rate.
No, I'm just saying
but
that
right
if they do
here,
it voluntarily, I have no problem with it.
This is the problem. It doesn't matter what we do. I mean, we here in the United States have all this benevolent intent. We're all nice and we say, okay, we're just going to sit there and we're going to talk about that stuff. That's not the way Tiananmen Square, China thinks. They sit there and they think we've got these political dissidents. You go down to Castro and you look at his prisons. We got these people who we don't really like. You know what? They're producing too much CO2. We've got a reason to get rid of them now. That's how history works. That's what the Great Leap Forward. Have you ever read about the Great Leap Forward in China?
Yes.
If you were a landowner, you were evil. You're dead. If you were an educator, you're evil. You're dead. If you're an artist, you're dead. These totalitarian states, when you give them the power to sit there and say, man is evil, they'll make sure they solve that problem. And you just better hope that you're not the one that they have an axe to grind with.
But then you shouldn't criticize anything because a totalitarian regime might kill people as a method of doing it. I think that's...
This is handing them their gift, though. I mean, this is we're giving them, and they're already demonstrating that they're very eager. It says right here, he said China's one-child policy, per couple policy introduced in the early 1980s, for instance, had a side effect of breaking global warming by limiting the population to 1.3 billion against a projected 1.6 billion without the policy. So right
Isn't
there,
that a fact? Do you disagree with that fact?
that China's one-child policy slowed their growth. I don't
And that the
disagree
side
with that at
effect
all.
was limiting global warming?
My point is, it doesn't take too much of a leap of faith or understanding of how totalitarian states to work to see what they're doing is they're saying, we've got a great reason. We can already justify infanticide with it. The next thing is the political. See what they did to Tiananmen Square for people just wanting freedom? Have you ever seen the pictures of what happened in Tiananmen? They bring the tanks out and they roll people over. You give them the reason. And what? These people were so bad they wanted freedom, a free press. They wanted to think. So you run
They
them
were
over with tanks.
dictators. People wanted to take away their power. They
And you're going to give
defended themselves,
you
quote,
want to give dictators the power to say global warming's bad. We need to get rid of people. They'll clean the job for you. Trust me on that one.
The fact that global warming is a problem and that people contributed to it. Well,
Okay, I'll give you.
If those are facts, of course, some totalitarian regime might
I will
take an
give you.
extra step.
I will give you the fact that global warming is bad. Do you think it's going to be anywhere near as bad if one of these population of 1 billion, 1.2 billion decides to do something about it? Do you think the cost involved of what happens with a totalitarian state when they want to get serious about this? Do you think that cost is going to be anywhere near the cost that you're going to impose by having warmer seasons?
I don't think any totalitarian country is going to kill a single person because of global warming. Just as global warming is the latest thing, but there's been all sorts of other environmental catastrophes that have been issues
Let's
all
talk
around
about
the world.
DDT.
And
How many people
no
have died?
totalitarian country that I know of has killed people as a way of reducing environmental harm.
Well, let's just talk about DDT. What we just said, we rushed to judgment back in the 60s. We stamped out DDT. What was the result of that? The result of that is over 1 million deaths a year in sub-Saharan Africa because we banned DDT.
But not because any totalitarian country decided to kill people
The intent,
as a method of...
whether it was our government,
that would never
it was our intergovernmental panel that. Well, that's like saying if I
You
can
didn't
take
kill
away
people.
if I take away food from you and you die of starvation, I didn't kill you. Okay, we took away their way of protecting themselves. We said the only way that you're going to be able to afford to wipe out malaria, which is, by the way, what we did. Once we wiped out malaria, suddenly we decided to ban it for the rest of the world. So what? The Africans pay the price? That to you is, whether it's a totalitarian government or not, the end result has been 34 million deaths due to malaria that could have been easily prevented. I'm not going to sit back and watch these environmentalists simply say, let's ban DDT, let this the third world die,
You point
and
to
I don't
DDT,
care.
but look at how many environmental catastrophes have been devastating to people's lives.
They killed
lots of
34
people.
million people. They killed 34 million people
34
Sure.
million
Well,
from
yeah.
DDT?
from DDT. One a year
From
since
no
it was
DDT.
banned.
No DDT.
No DDT. They
million
when they
a year?
banned DDT, you have 1 million deaths a year.
From
It was
malaria?
banned 34 years ago. From malaria, 1 million a year.
Well, I don't know.
Someone said you could drink DDT. It really wasn't that.
Yeah, matter of fact, when they used to teach, the one professor there's a story about the professor who used to come in and eat a teaspoon of DDT. When you were during World War II, when you went in for your thing, they used to cover you with DDT to splash you off. The one professor, like I said, eats it. More importantly, is if you look at the research on DDT, you know they always claim that what it did was it thinned eggs. Okay, well it turned out that the pheasant eggs that had their thinned eggs, they had a higher survival rate. So, okay, maybe it did thin your egg, but there was a higher survival rate. And so what was the problem?
Rachel Carlson, that Silent Spring was baloney?
Yeah, it was all based on junk science. And when they went back to try to reproduce the experiments, they couldn't do it. And like I said, the one experiment when they used pheasant eggs, they did find what eggs they did find thinning in had a higher survival rate. And yet we sacrificed 1 million people a year due to malaria.
I just find it very convincing.
Well, I made $5 million listening to a guy similar to him, so I liked it.
So, but
You're good at talking. You're good at
Well, that's-
lecture or whatever.
well, that's why I enjoy
You're
doing
good
this.
too, though.
Well, yeah.
You're good too.
Well, I
I'm
like this give and
talking
take.
about stuff I know more about.
Yeah.
You have a nice man.
Well, that's why I like this give and take,
Can
because this is what I really
you
like.
go through more slides?
Oh,
I also should.
You gotta go.
It's just getting late. But
Can you give me 10 more minutes? Just 10 more
I kind of. Okay.
well, this
The
is
thing is, we're talking about stuff I know nothing about, and I feel like I'm just.
The viewer knows less.
okay. Well, this is the big argument though here. This is the increase in Woodstock, because if you say okay,
Say red, yellow.
okay,
What's that
the
chart?
red areas has been a decrease, or basically down at the bottom it points out that you've been losing Woodstock, and Woodstock is the actual amount of wood, meaning that.
How's that right?
And meaning that it's not necessarily the acreage, but it's the actual, let's say, weight of wood. And as you can see, most people don't know this, the northern hemisphere, where the vast majority of trees are, has become greatly greener, meaning there's been a tremendous growth in forests and forest density in the northern hemisphere. And this is according to the University of Helsinki. You can see that the majority of thinning of our forests occurs in the southern hemisphere. That's where the cooling goes. And so you can see from this situation that the temperature is consistent not only with the industrial age, but also the implementation of fire prevention in the northern hemisphere. So they both go along together, but my argument is that it's much more likely that the trees and the water vapor increase has been far more significant than the increase in CO2. Here's the NAS report that trees cause global warming. It's something your viewers may want to look up. It sounds like the most ridiculous claim anyone could ever make, but it's as according to the National Academies of Science. I do want to show one other thing, though, and it has to do with, we keep talking about how important of a greenhouse gas CO2 is. Whenever you're doing a normal scientific study, you look for what's called a control factor, and I think I've been able to find one where I can say, okay, I'm sorry about this, my computer seems to be slow.
5 minutes.
5 minutes? Let me get to it real quick. See this? Oh, this is an interesting chart, just to really drive home the fact that water vapor is the problem. If you look down and to your right, that chart is atmospheric temperature, and you can see on the x-axis you have the latitude. You have the North Pole and the South Pole, and then you have altitude, and you go up. And as you can see, the green area is where the trapped heat is. That's where the warmth is. If you look up and to your left, you see a chart that's almost identical to it. That chart up and to the left is water vapor. So as you can see, water vapor and temperature correlate extremely well in the atmosphere. The other problem with CO2 is, if in fact CO2 did trap heat, you would see them publishing charts like this for CO2, but you don't see them anywhere. But you do see them for water vapor. Let me show this one chart real quick. This is a...
You're claiming that CO2 does not trap heat?
CO2 traps a very little bit of heat. Yeah, very much. And I've shown that with that spectrum. And once again, here is...
I think you'll have trouble finding a single climate scientist that
no, I'll show
that simple statement.
Well, I'll show you. I mean, right here, actually right here, you can see it. This is the infrared absorption chart, and sure enough, that top, if you look down at the very bottom where it says wavelengths, it has total absorption, water vapor, and CO2. That CO2 is the heat that is trapped. The problem is that first band, as I showed earlier, overlaps water vapor. So water vapor totally overwhelms it. The only heat that is being, only heat that is being trapped by CO2 is this little tiny bump. I should go back to that original chart, but my computer's real slow. I mean, there's very little. Oh shoot. Let's just go back to that at the beginning.
Well, you know, I've said before that the fact that it looks small doesn't mean anything. A little bit of arsenic.
Well, yeah, but you can't disagree with the absorption chart, though.
You have to calculate the numbers, and that's what scientists have done. And they're in agreement that CO2 is a big.
Oops. Paul, the computer's acting funny.
Oh,
hold on a second, I got it. I just want to show one thing here, just because when you do this kind of stuff, you look for a control where you can say, okay, everything else held equal, here's the cause or here's the effect, and I think I have a pretty good example of that, if I can only find it. For some reason, right here. Okay. Now you made a comment earlier that CO2, without CO2, temperatures would be much colder, right? And you made a comment that CO2 traps heat and it's caused a global warming effect. Well, whenever you're doing a scientific study, you look for a control where you can say, okay, this factor is going to be basically maintained steady, and then over here I'm going to take an almost identical situation, but I'm going to change something to measure its difference. That's how science is done. All else held equal, and then you change a factor. Let's say you have one person who sits on the couch all day and one person exercising. You measure the difference, and you can contribute to the exercise. Well, whenever the global warming scientists are talking about CO2, they say it traps a great deal of heat. Well, I was able to find a situation where you could find an environment where you had water vapor and CO2, and then something occurs to pull the water vapor out, and so you're left with only CO2, so you can have a measurement of a temperature change. Well, interesting, if you go down to Antarctica, they have their weather stations down there, and they review this. And what's interesting about it is, as the water comes off of the oceans, it's very wet, very humid, and very warm. As it goes over the ice, the water vapor precipitates out, so that by the time you get to the interior part of Antarctica, there is nothing left in that atmosphere except CO2 and whatever else is there. The point is, the entire water vapor has been pulled out. So you have incredibly dry air with no water vapor in the interior part of Antarctica, very wet air at the coast. What happens with it is, as it goes across there and you lose the water vapor, the temperatures of the air plummets. And they say here, this is exactly what the Antarctic Weather Station claims. The extreme dryness of the air causes any heat that is radiated back into the atmosphere to be lost instead of being absorbed by water vapor in the atmosphere. So when you go look at the climatologists and they don't know that you're looking at them, the way that they explain climate change and temperature change isn't through CO2, it's through water vapor. I found the exact same phenomenon when you look in the Smoky Mountains, because one side of the mountain is dry, one side is wet, and they say, once again, the reason there's a temperature change is because water vapor is on the one side, not the other. I have never seen them claim that there's a difference in temperature due to a difference in CO2 gradient, but you do find it with water vapor. And by the way,
CO2 and water vapor are both greenhouse gases, so
sure,
they both work.
But my point is, when you pull water vapor out, CO2 does not trap very much heat because the coldest place on the Earth is the area where you have CO2, but you don't have water vapor, and that's
because it's Antarctica. It gets very little limited sunlight because of the angle.
Sure, but once again, when you have water vapor in the air, it's much warmer than it is when you don't.
Right. What they haven't done is get rid of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and see what difference that makes, because you can't do that experiment. But you can do that experiment in a laboratory and see CO2 traps heat. Not just other gases
that's
too.
a great example.
But
show me that. I mean, because I've looked for it, and I'm asking for your help on this one, and all your listeners and viewers. I'd like to see this. And if you can find this study done, please send it to me. What you're saying is you're trying to find empirical evidence that CO2 traps enough heat to cause a measurable temperature change. Atmospheric CO2 has increased from 280 to 380 parts per million in the last 100 or so years. Is that incorrect or correct?
Sounds right.
Sounds absolutely right. What I encourage everybody out there to do is get a flask, 2 flasks, or terrariums or whatever, have it with atmospheric air, which is about 380 parts per million, and have another terrarium or flask with 280 parts per million of atmospheric air. Somehow pull out the CO2. Put a tree in there or something. Shine an infrared light on it and measure the temperature change between the 2 terrariums. If you can do that and show me a discernible temperature change between the 2 terrariums, you will prove everything that I said wrong. If you can't measure temperature change, that means I'm right and all these global warming scientists are wrong.
But
Prove me wrong.
Scientists, they do measure.
Oh, did you get that last little part?
Yeah, I did.
Good. Because that's all you got to do.
Continue. I want to hear what you have to say.
Now I've just lost. What were you saying?
All right.
No,
Roll out that theory.
If you you can measure the absorption. In fact, those charts of absorption of different wavelengths of light are done by measuring the absorbed energy, which gets converted into heat. So you can measure very exactly. You might not be able to put a thermometer into a flask this big, but you can.
But my point is,
It's
you've
definitely
got
something you can
infrared radiation, for one, is very low energy light, correct? It's a longer wavelength light, very low energy, right? My point is that you're talking a very sliver of a very low energy wavelength to begin with. Okay? You're talking an incredibly small amount of energy that's even there to be absorbed. CO2 has those 3 little spikes.
I guess, I
I
think I'm repeating myself.
Yeah.
Again and again, all this stuff has been taken into account, and you seem to just not believe that. And if I was a climate scientist, I could tell you specifically, and I'm not. So that's why it's not right. Maybe
But
that I'm here.
you're not a. But
just-
you're not a
You're
climate
not a climate
scientist.
scientist either.
Well, I know that's my point. But my point is, you're not a climate scientist, but you are a physicist, and you would
I am,
support
and I do
global
work
warming
on
theory.
climate.
Because what you're doing is, you're putting your faith or your trust in these other scientists, right? And that is exactly what I've